They chained the body, but they could never chain the spirit. They tried to erase the memory, but they could never silence the song. They tried to bury the light of a people, yet from the ashes rose a power stronger than oppression itself. The unbroken spirit of the African soul. The story of slavery is one of the darkest chapters in human history, yet within that darkness glows the brightest flame of resilience the world has ever seen. It is not a story only of pain, it is a story of survival, endurance, and the unstoppable will of a people who refused to die even when the world told them they had no right to live. Long before the slave ships crossed the Atlantic, Africa was a continent of kingdoms, scholars, and creators. It was the birthplace of civilization, where wisdom was passed through proverbs, music carried messages of truth, and rhythm bound communities together in unity. The Africans who were taken were not nameless captives, they were sons and daughters of empires, farmers, healers, scientists, artists, and warriors. When they were torn from their homeland, they carried more than sorrow, they carried memory. They carried rhythm, faith, and language hidden in their hearts. Even when their names were stripped away, their essence remained untouched, because what defines a people cannot be stolen. Slavery tried to destroy identity, but it could not erase what was rooted in the soul. The whip could tear the flesh, but it could not destroy the knowledge of who they were. The chains could bind the hands, but they could not silence the drum that beat inside the chest of every enslaved African. That rhythm, that pulse of Africa, traveled across oceans and generations. It transformed sorrow into song, despair into determination, and suffering into strength. Out of the cries of anguish came melodies of hope. Songs that carried messages of freedom hidden within them. Even in bondage, the African spirit found a way to speak, to sing, to remember. Every plantation that tried to crush that spirit became a battlefield for the human soul. Yet through unimaginable pain, they built families, shared knowledge, and planted seeds of culture that still grow today. The African soul became a force of endurance so powerful that even centuries of oppression could not break it. The same people who were told they were less than human became the heart of nations, the creators of music that shaped the world, the thinkers who redefined what it means to be free. Their story is not one of defeat, it is one of victory against all odds. The unbroken spirit of the African soul is not found in the chains of history, it is found in the will to rise. It is seen in the eyes of those who marched for civil rights, in the voices that demanded justice, and in the hands that built new worlds from nothing. It is felt in the rhythm of drums that still echo through the streets of Lagos, Accra, Kingston, and New Orleans, the same rhythm that once echoed through the villages of the ancestors. The world has tried to silence that rhythm, but it cannot silence the heartbeat of truth. The story of slavery is not just about loss, it is about transformation. From the pain of captivity came new cultures, new identities, and new forms of expression that have enriched the entire world. Jazz, blues, reggae, gospel, hip-hop. These are not just music genres, they are coded histories, stories of endurance, hope, and resistance. They are the soundtracks of survival. They are proof that the African soul can never be silenced, because it turns suffering into strength and struggle into song. Every note, every lyric, every dance is a testimony we are still here. Even after the chains were broken, the battle was far from over. The descendants of those who endured slavery faced new forms of oppression, discrimination, segregation, and systemic inequality. But still, the spirit stood unbroken. Each generation fought not just for survival, but for dignity. They built schools, wrote books, created art, led movements, and redefined what freedom truly meant. They turned pain into purpose and suffering into service. The same courage that kept their ancestors alive now fuels a new generation determined to reclaim their heritage, their narrative, and their pride. To understand the unbroken spirit of the African soul is to understand that freedom is not simply the absence of chains, it is the presence of purpose. It is the fire that refuses to go out even when surrounded by dark. It is the memory of the ancestors whispering, "You are more than what the world calls you." It is the ability to look at a history full of suffering and still see beauty, strength, and hope. It is a reminder that no matter how long the night, the dawn always belongs to those who do not surrender. What slavery couldn't kill was the belief in tomorrow. When everything was taken, the African spirit held on to faith, not blind faith in chance, but faith in the power of creation, resilience, and self-worth. The enslaved taught their children that freedom begins in the mind long before it reaches the body. They passed down a legacy of strength that cannot be documented on paper but lives in every rhythm, every prayer, every word spoken with pride. This spiritual inheritance is Africa's eternal gift to the world, the understanding that true strength comes not from power over others but from mastery over the self. Even today, the descendants of those who were enslaved continue to rise from the weight of history. They build businesses, lead nations, create art, and speak truth in places where silence once reigned. They carry in their DNA the proof that greatness cannot be erased, no matter how hard the world tries. The same hands that once tilled the earth in bondage now shape the future with brilliance and innovation. The same minds once denied education now educate the world. That is the miracle of the African soul. It transforms oppression into opportunity, chains into courage, and pain into power. Everywhere you look, the spirit of Africa lives in the rhythm of music, in the creativity of fashion, in the boldness of expression, in the resilience of communities that never stop rebuilding. It lives in the laughter that refuses to fade, in the strength of mothers who carry generations forward, in the determination of youth who refuse to forget where they come from. The African soul is a living fire passed from heart to heart, generation to generation. It is the pulse of humanity itself, ancient, powerful, and eternal. So when you look at history, don't just see chains, see courage. Don't just see loss, see legacy. The African story is not one of destruction but resurrection. The unbroken spirit of the African soul is living proof that no force on earth can destroy what is born of truth, love, and purpose. Slavery could take lives, but it could not take meaning. It could separate families, but it could not break unity. It could suppress voices, but it could not stop the song. Because the African spirit does not bow, it rises. It rises every time a child dreams, every time a voice speaks truth, every time a people stand tall and say, "We remain." That is what slavery couldn't kill: the eternal flame of identity, the heartbeat of resilience, and the unshakable belief that from pain can come power. The story of the African soul is not a tragedy. It is a triumph written in the language of endurance. It reminds the world that no matter what is taken away, what truly belongs to the spirit can never die. Africa's greatest strength has never been in her gold, her diamonds, or her land. It has always been in her people. That strength lives on, unbroken, unstoppable, and eternal. Slavery may have stolen freedom, but it could never conquer the unbreakable will and dignity of the African soul. The story of African resilience is not one of defeat, but of transformation. A narrative that echoes through generations, whispering of courage, endurance, and an unshakable spirit that refused to be destroyed. The chains that bound bodies could never capture the essence of what it meant to be African, proud, powerful, and rooted in something far deeper than oppression. The world witnessed the brutality of slavery, yet what often went unseen was the quiet rebellion of the human heart. Every song sung in the fields, every prayer whispered in the dark, every rhythm beaten on a drum was a declaration that the spirit would not die. From the coasts of West Africa to the plantations of the Americas, that same pulse of dignity and identity beat within those who were forced to live in unimaginable suffering. It was a reminder that identity could be stripped from the surface, but never from the soul. This resilience became the seed of something extraordinary. It became the foundation upon which future generations would rise, not just to survive, but to reclaim their worth. The African soul, though wounded, began to heal through culture, community, and memory. The pain became purpose. The scars became symbols of endurance. Even when the world tried to erase history, the descendants of those who were enslaved began to write it back, louder and prouder than ever. They turned pain into poetry, oppression into rhythm, struggle into song. Jazz, blues, gospel, reggae, hip-hop, all were born from the same ancestral cry for freedom and recognition. Each note carried the message that no system, no empire, no oppression could extinguish the African essence. The unbroken spirit of Africa did not just survive, it thrived. Across continents and oceans, it found new expressions. In the Caribbean, it danced in the fire of rebellion. In America, it marched through civil rights movements. In Africa itself, it fueled liberation from colonial rule. Everywhere it went, it carried the unspoken truth that the power of a people united by resilience can outlive any attempt to destroy them. This strength wasn't built overnight, it was forged through centuries of endurance. The African spirit learned to bend but never break, to weep but never surrender, to lose everything yet still rise again with even greater power. What slavery could not kill was the deep connection to ancestry, the memory of greatness that preceded change. Before slavery, there were kingdoms: Mali, Songhai, Ghana, Benin, Kemet, civilizations that mastered trade, philosophy, mathematics, and spirituality long before Europe knew their names. That memory lived inside every captive heart. Even if they could not speak their native tongues or practice their customs, they remembered who they were through rhythm, through ritual, through the unspoken power of survival. That memory became their weapon. It kept them alive through centuries of struggle. It whispered, "You are more than this pain. You come from kings and queens, scholars and builders, healers and dreamers." That whisper became a roar in time. The unbroken spirit of the African soul has reshaped the world, not just through resilience, but through creativity and wisdom. It is the rhythm behind the world's music, the fire behind revolutions, the vision behind movements for justice and equality. It is a force that cannot be contained because it is built on truth, the truth that identity cannot be erased, and spirit cannot be enslaved. Even in the darkest chapters of history, the African spirit found light. It built families where there were none, found laughter and sorrow and strength in togetherness. That's what makes it unbreakable. Today, the legacy of that resilience continues to guide us. It reminds us that no matter how deep the wound, healing is possible. It reminds us that our history is not defined by what was taken from us, but by what we refuse to let go of, our humanity, our culture, The world often speaks of progress and freedom, but few understand that the blueprint for endurance was written in the hearts of those who survived slavery. They carried the world forward with their pain and their power. They gave humanity a lesson in what it means to rise from ashes and still shine. We see the descendants of that unbroken spirit in every field today, in art, science, music, sports, and leadership. Their success is not accidental, it is ancestral. It is the manifestation of centuries of sacrifice, hope, and resilience. When a black child dreams, that dream is backed by the strength of generations who endured the impossible. When a black leader rises, their power echoes the courage of ancestors who stood tall even when changed. When a community unites, it continues the eternal rhythm of Africa's heart, one that beats not for survival but for greatness. The resilience beyond chains is not just a story of the past, it's a call to the present. It urges every descendant of Africa to remember who they are, to honor their history, and to live in the fullness of their power. It challenges the world to see beyond stereotypes and to recognize that the same people once enslaved built the cultural, spiritual, and creative backbone of humanity. The African spirit didn't just survive slavery, it transformed it into a source of global enlightenment. It became the reminder that greatness can rise from suffering, that strength can be born from struggle, and that light can always overcome darkness. Every revolution of freedom, every movement for justice carries a piece of that spirit. It is the quiet, steady fire that refuses to be extinguished. That fire burns in every descendant of the diaspora today. It lives in the pride of heritage, in the rhythm of the drum, in the unity of community, and in the brilliance of creation. Slavery tried to silence it, but instead it amplified the song of the African soul until the world had no choice but to listen. That is the power of resilience beyond chains. It is not simply about endurance, it is about transcendence. It is about transforming suffering into strength and turning loss into legacy. The African spirit did not merely endure, it overcame. It stands as proof that the human soul, when grounded in truth and identity, can withstand any darkness and still emerge radiant. That unbroken, untamed, and undefeated spirit continues to shape the world, a living testament that though the chains were real, the soul was always free. From centuries of suffering, emerged a beauty the world could never destroy, creativity that healed wounds too deep for words, and strength that transformed pain into power. When the African people were torn from their homeland and scattered across oceans, they carried more than just the memory of loss. They carried rhythm, vision, and the essence of life itself. What slavery sought to silence became the foundation of some of the most powerful expressions of humanity ever known. Pain became the soil, and from that soil, creativity bloomed, a creativity that was both resistance and rebirth. Every drumbeat, every song, every story whispered in secret was a way to remind the world that though the body could be bound, the spirit remained boundless. Through centuries of torment, art became language, and music became medicine. The cries of the enslaved were not cries of defeat. They were coded messages of hope, carrying across fields and continents. Each note carried history, identity, and unyielding strength. The transformation through pain was not accidental. It was a conscious act of survival, a spiritual rebellion against despair. Africans learned to take what was meant to destroy them and turn it into something that gave life. On plantations, hymns and chants emerged, becoming the roots of blues and gospel. In hidden corners, rhythm was born again as the heartbeat of resistance. Later, jazz flowed from that same creative river, speaking truth through improvisation, blending sorrow with joy, struggle with freedom. Every sound carried the echo of chains, yet every rhythm broke them anew. This was not just music, it was the voice of endurance. It was proof that pain can produce power, and that beauty can be forged in the hottest fire. The art of a people once silenced became the world's universal language. The strength born from that transformation reshaped not only those who created it, but the entire world. African creativity became the world's rhythm, influencing cultures far beyond its origin. The spiritual songs of survival evolved into the jazz that shaped American identity, the reggae that became the sound of liberation, the hip-hop that gave voice to the voiceless. Even in fashion, sculpture, and philosophy, the essence of African creativity persisted, raw, soulful, and fearless. It carried messages of freedom wrapped in beauty, and stories of pain transformed into pride. The world danced to the very rhythms born from suffering, often without realizing that the music was a coded history of survival. This transformation was not just cultural, it was deeply human. It proved that the most powerful force on earth is not destruction but creation, the ability to turn wounds into wisdom and suffering into strength. Generations later, that creative brilliance continues to define and inspire. The descendants of those who endured slavery and colonization now stand as the architects of modern culture, leaders of innovation, and symbols of perseverance. They turned centuries of dehumanization into lessons of humanity. They built movements from melodies and revolutions from rhythm. Every mural painted, every song sung, every dance performed by the children of Africa carries an echo of the past, a reminder that transformation is not just possible, it is inevitable when the spirit refuses to break. Through that creative energy, Africans and their descendants rewrote the world's narrative, proving that even in the darkest times, light can be found within. The pain of the past still lingers, but it has become a source of strength. It has become a reminder that identity cannot be erased. The scars are not signs of weakness, they are symbols of rebirth. For centuries, Africans were told to forget their roots, to abandon their culture, and to assimilate into systems that never intended to accept them. But through art, music, and storytelling, they reclaimed their narrative. They reminded the world that Africa is not a continent of victims, but of visionaries, dreamers, and creators. The unbroken connection to heritage gave birth to new movements, Pan-Africanism, Afrofuturism, and a cultural renaissance that continues to awaken pride and purpose in generations to come. Transformation through pain is one of life's greatest paradoxes. It teaches that what is meant for destruction can become the very tool for creation. The African story embodies that truth more profoundly than any other. The suffering endured was beyond comprehension, yet what emerged from it was beauty beyond imagination. This transformation is the greatest act of power, not revenge, not bitterness, but creation. The creation of new worlds, new art forms, new visions of what it means to be human. It is the ability to say, "You tried to break me, but I built something greater from the piece." That is the heart of resilience, the will to create even when the world tries to silence you. The African spirit continues to influence every corner of the earth, shaping not only art but the very essence of cultural expression. It is found in the rhythm of modern music, in the patterns of global design, in the energy of youth reclaiming their roots. From fashion houses in Paris to stages in Lagos, from murals in Harlem to poetry in Johannesburg, that same creative fire burns on. It transcends time and geography, uniting people through shared rhythm and expression. It tells the story of a people who refused to be defined by oppression. It tells of a journey where creativity was not luxury but survival, a spiritual tool for remembering who they were, even when the world forgot. This transformation also changed how the world sees power. Once power was seen only in dominance, in control, in empire. But through the African experience, power revealed a deeper truth, that real power is the ability to rise after being crushed, to create when stripped of everything, to love when surrounded by hate. The African soul taught humanity that strength lies not in conquest, but in endurance, in compassion, in creation. That is the ultimate victory. That is what the world learned from Africa, that pain can give birth to genius, and that the spirit, once awakened, cannot be silenced again. The legacy of this transformation is still unfolding. The world continues to learn from the African ability to turn struggle into art, oppression into expression, and history into inspiration. It is a reminder for everyone that within pain lies potential, and within brokenness lies beauty waiting to be born. Africa's story is not just the story of one people, it is the story of humanity's greatest transformation. It is the eternal reminder that light shines brightest through cracks, and that no matter how heavy the chains, creativity will always find a way to sing. The story of Africa is not just the story of a continent. It is the story of the human soul learning how to survive the impossible. The eternal flame of identity has burned through centuries of pain, silence, and separation, yet it has never gone out. What slavery and colonization tried to erase became the very thing that made Africa immortal. The African soul is unbroken, not because it escaped suffering, but because it turned suffering into strength. Through generations of loss, that identity woven into language, rhythm, and culture was passed on like a sacred fire, glowing in the hearts of those who refused to forget who they were. No empire, no chain, no ocean could drown it, because it was not just a memory, it was a force of life itself. Even when the African was told to forget his name, his language, his gods, his home, something inside whispered reminders of his worth. The eternal flame of identity does not depend on recognition from others. It burns because it knows itself. It flickers in the voice of a child learning to drum in Ghana, in the sway of a mother dancing to a rhythm older than her nation, in the poet of Harlem who writes of freedom with words his ancestors never got to speak. It burns in the quiet strength of those who stand tall in their skin, in their history, and in their truth. It is in the music that heals wounds, the art that tells stories the world tried to bury, and the unity that keeps communities alive when everything else is designed to divide them. That flame has been tested by every imaginable trial. When millions were chained and shipped across oceans, the world thought they were breaking a people. But what they truly did was scatter embers that would later ignite revolutions, movements, and awakening. Those taken from Africa carried within them not just memories but an identity that refused to die. It was in their songs, in their stories, in the way they loved one another despite the pain. The slave ship could not carry it. The whip could not silence it. And time could not erase it. The descendants of those who were taken carry that same spark today. It is the reason why the African diaspora thrives across the world, why the rhythm of Africa can still be heard in the beats of global music, in the expressions of culture, and in the pride that is finally rising again. True power lies not in wealth or conquest, but in the endurance of the spirit. Empires rise and fall, borders shift, currencies lose value, but the soul of a people who refuse to forget who they are, now that is eternal. That is the kind of power that can't be bought or conquered. For centuries, Africa was stripped of its resources, its people, its dignity. Yet it remains the heartbeat of the world. Every nation that tried to silence it ended up taking from it its art, its rhythm, its wisdom, and still, Africa gives. Still, Africa endures. That endurance is not weakness, it is the truest form of strength humanity has ever seen. The African identity is not fragile, it is fluid, adaptable, and ever-evolving. It has taken on new forms wherever it has traveled. From the coasts of Brazil to the streets of London, from the islands of the Caribbean to the cities of America, that flame continues to burn through language, style, music, and movement. It is the reason that even when people forget their exact roots, something within them still calls to the motherland. That call is not just nostalgia, it is memory written in DNA. It is the body's way of remembering what the world made it forget. It is that same call that pushes young people of African descent to rediscover their ancestry, to reconnect with traditions, and to rebuild what was once stolen. The eternal flame of identity shines most brightly when people understand that their worth does not depend on validation. The African soul does not need the world to tell it that it matters. It has always mattered. From the pyramids of Kemet to the kingdoms of Mali, from the scholars of Timbuktu to the healers of the Congo, Africa was already shaping the destiny of humanity long before the rest of the world understood civilization. That history was buried, rewritten, and distorted, but truth has a way of surviving. And now that truth is rising again through knowledge, through pride, and through connection. The flame burns brighter when truth is embraced, and that is exactly what is happening now, the reawakening of identity after centuries of silence. But this identity is not just about looking back, it is also about looking forward. The African soul's endurance has taught the world that greatness is not measured by what one owns, but by what one overcomes. To endure is to live beyond oppression, to rise above injustice, and to keep creating when destruction surrounds you. The African people have done this time and time again, transforming hardship into art, pain into poetry, and loss into legacy. They have proven that resilience is not a reaction but a way of life. Every generation carries the torch further, lighting the path for those yet to come. Even in the modern world where distractions and divisions are greater than ever, that same spirit continues to unite. In the rise of Pan-African movements, in the celebration of Black excellence, in the demand for justice and equality, you can see that the flame has not dimmed. The world may change its tools of oppression through media, economy, or politics, but the African soul continues to adapt, continues to create, continues to endure. The very existence of Black joy, creativity, and brilliance in the face of global adversity is a miracle born of that flame. It is a living testimony that you cannot kill what was born eternal. The African identity is not just about color or culture, it is about connection to each other, to the land, and to the truth of being. It is about the understanding that no matter how much is taken, something deeper always remains. The spirit of Africa does not just survive, it transforms, it evolves, it transcends. That is why even after centuries of separation, people across the world are finding their way back to their roots. The call of identity is irresistible. It reminds us that we are not lost. We are rediscovering. We are not broken. We are rebuilding. We are not defined by what happened to us. We are defined by how we rise from. And that is the lesson the African soul gives to the world. Endurance is the purest form of strength. It is not loud or boastful. It is silent, steady, and eternal. It teaches us that no matter what forces try to bury the truth, the roots will always find their way to the light. The African identity, once shamed and suppressed, is now becoming the very foundation of global creativity, innovation, and resilience. It is the pulse behind progress, the inspiration behind art, and the rhythm behind every movement for justice. The eternal flame of identity burns not because it never faced darkness, but because it refused to let the darkness win. It is the flame that lights the way forward for every generation that chooses to remember, to create, and to stand tall. The African soul is proof that no power on earth can destroy what is divine in spirit. That is what slavery could not kill, what colonization could not erase, and what time could not fade. The unbroken, unstoppable, and everlasting light of Africa's identity.